Normandy, summer of 1944, the hedgerows lie quiet beneath a pale sky. A German Panther tank commander stands half exposed from his cupola, scanning the open fields ahead. Nearly 3,000 meters of ground stretch before him, broken only by scattered trees and distant hedgerows. There is no movement, no muzzle flash, no sound of artillery. Everything feels calm. He gives the order to advance. 30 seconds later, the battlefield erupts not with explosions or roaring shells, but with something far more unsettling. Bullets begin falling from above at steep angles, striking the earth like invisible rain. Infantry moving alongside the tanks collapse metal rings against armor. Men dive for cover that does not exist. The commander slams his hatch shut. Inside the tank, vision shrinks to narrow periscopes. The outside world becomes distorted and blind. The advance slows to a crawl. The enemy remains unseen. No gun flashes, no firing line, no clear direction of attack, and yet they are under fire. The weapon harassing them is not ahead, not nearby, but more than 2 miles away, hidden deep behind British lines. Operated by men who cannot see their targets any more than the Germans can see them. This is not artillery. It is not a mortar. It is the British Vickers medium machine gun, used in a way no other army truly understood. Every major power in the Second World War fielded machine guns. The Germans had their MG-34 and MG-42, terrifying weapons whose fire sounded like tearing fabric. The Americans relied on the rugged Browning, dependable and powerful. The Soviets flooded battlefields with automatic fire of their own. Yet none of them used their machine guns quite like the British did. Most armies treated machine guns as tools of direct fire, meant to suppress the enemy so infantry could move forward. Their purpose was immediate and visible. The British saw something different. They saw not a squad weapon, but a mathematical instrument. By the late 1930s, the British Army had developed a system that transformed the machine gun into a form of artillery without shells, capable of shaping entire battlefields through indirect fire, denial of movement, and psychological pressure. This was not theory or experimentation. It was doctrine. At the center of this system stood a weapon many believed obsolete even before the war began. The Vickers machine gun looked outdated, heavy, and cumbersome. It was water-cooled when others had shifted to air cooling. It was belt-fed when box magazines seemed more modern. It required a heavy tripod and a trained crew. The gun alone weighed roughly 30 pounds, with water in the jacket, add the tripod, ammunition, condenser can, and tools, and a full team carried well over 90 pounds before firing a single shot. To German observers, it looked like a relic of another era. They were wrong. The Vickers fired the standard .303 British cartridge at a rate between 450 and 600 rounds per minute, with a muzzle velocity around 2,440 feet per second. On paper, this placed it in the middle of its contemporaries. What made it different was not speed, but endurance. Air-cooled machine guns overheated quickly. After a few hundred rounds, barrels glowed, warped, or failed. Crews were forced to pause, change barrels, and expose themselves. Even the feared MG-42, despite its astonishing rate of fire, required frequent barrel changes. The Vickers did not. Its water jacket absorbed heat continuously, venting steam into a condenser can where it cooled and returned as liquid. With proper discipline and water supply, the gun could fire for hours without stopping. Under controlled conditions, it could sustain 10,000 rounds per hour, not for minutes, but for entire engagements. Post-war trials would push individual guns into the millions of rounds with minimal degradation. This reliability changed everything. Most armies saw machine guns as direct fire weapons. You saw the enemy and you fired at them. The British asked a different question: what if you did not need to see the enemy at all? Borrowing concepts from artillery doctrine, British gunners began treating machine guns as precision instruments of indirect fire. They studied trajectories, calculated angles, measured wind, temperature, and air pressure. They plotted firing data using maps, tables, and calibrated sights. Crews adjusted elevation and traverse using finely tuned dials, placing fire onto coordinates rather than targets. They were not aiming at soldiers. They were aiming at space itself. Bullets fired in this way formed what was known as a beaten zone, an elongated area where rounds impacted the ground. At close range, this zone was long and narrow. At medium ranges, it widened and shortened. At extreme distances, it stretched again as small variations in velocity multiplied across the trajectory. British gunners studied this geometry in detail. They learned how to overlap beaten zones from multiple guns, creating curtains of fire that denied entire areas of terrain. Infantry advancing through such zones faced not isolated bursts, but continuous, unavoidable destruction. Doctrine required a minimum of 4 guns firing together to ensure coverage. The gunners often never saw their targets, yet the bullets always arrived to make this system work. Organization was critical. Instead of distributing machine guns among infantry companies, the British centralized them into dedicated machine gun battalions at the divisional level. Units such as the Middlesex Regiment, the Manchester Regiment, the Cheshire Regiment, and the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers were reorganized specifically for this role before the war. Each battalion fielded between 36 and 48 Vickers guns, supported by mortar and transport. This allowed commanders to mass firepower precisely where it was needed. Machine gun fire became part of formal battle planning, integrated with artillery barrages and infantry movement. Guns were moved forward in universal carriers, deployed rapidly, and then fired for hours without pause. This was not improvisation. It was a system refined through doctrine, training, and experience. When British machine gun battalions went into action, the psychological effect was devastating. German troops learned that open ground was no longer safe, even miles behind the front line. Tank commanders discovered that lifting a hatch could mean death from a bullet fired by men they would never see. There was no warning, no visible enemy, no sound to pinpoint, only impact. By 1944, this method had matured into a devastating form of battlefield control, refined across North Africa, Italy, and Northwest Europe. The battlefield itself had changed. Space was no longer empty. It was controlled, measured, and lethal. And this was only the beginning of what British machine gun doctrine would become. By 1942, the British system of machine gun warfare had matured from theory into something far more dangerous, a battlefield method refined through repetition, failure, and survival. In North Africa, the desert offered no cover, no hedgerows, no forests, only open ground where movement meant exposure. Here, the Vickers revealed its true purpose. During the fighting around El Alamein, British machine gun battalions demonstrated that sustained fire could dominate terrain long after artillery barrages ended. Infantry learned to advance not behind explosions, but behind an invisible curtain of bullets that denied the enemy freedom of movement. German units discovered that even when artillery fire lifted, the ground remained lethal. Men attempting to reposition or withdraw were cut down by fire they could neither locate nor silence. The battlefield no longer belonged to whoever had the most guns, it belonged to whoever controlled space itself. At outpost. Sniped during the Second Battle of El Alamein, Vickers guns from the 2nd Battalion Rifle Brigade played a decisive role. As German armored units attempted to maneuver, machine gunners poured sustained fire into open approaches. Tank crews abandoning disabled vehicles were caught in the open, struck down before they could reach cover. These were not snapshots or lucky hits. They were calculated zones of death, plotted hours earlier, and executed with cold precision. The men behind the guns often never saw who they killed. They did not need to. Their role was not to fight enemies, they denied terrain. This philosophy followed British forces across theaters. In Italy, where mountainous terrain broke sightlines and limited traditional artillery observation, indirect machine gun fire proved invaluable. At Monte Cassino, British and Commonwealth forces used range tables and observation posts to arc bullets over ridgelines and into German-held positions. Even when weather-grounded aircraft and artillery observers lost visibility, the machine gun crews continued firing by calculation alone. Fire plans were prepared in advance, mapped carefully, and executed with clockwork precision. The battlefield became predictable to the British and terrifyingly unpredictable to their enemy. In Burma, the doctrine evolved further. Dense jungle erased visibility almost completely. Japanese infiltration tactics relied on stealth and close-range movement, but the British adapted. Machine guns were used to block likely avenues of approach, fire along jungle tracks, and seal off areas where enemy units attempted to regroup. During the battles of Impal and Kohima, Vickers guns played a decisive role in holding defensive positions against repeated assaults. The guns fired day and night, often guided only by compass bearings and prior reconnaissance. Japanese soldiers learned that darkness offered no protection. The air itself had become hostile. The true power of the Vickers lay not in individual engagements, but in coordination. By the later years of the war, British commanders integrated machine gun fire into complex, multi